I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, crying in the middle of a quiet gym, trying to hold myself together while my fitness trainer stood just a few steps away. The smell of sweat and rubber mats filled the air, and soft music played in the background. But for me, everything had gone silent. My hands were trembling, heart pounding faster than any workout I'd done, and I could feel the weight of emotions I had buried for so long finally rising to the surface. I didn't expect anyone to notice, let alone care. But then, he touched my shoulder. Gently. Not in a way that crossed a line, but with a warmth and calmness I hadn't felt in a long time. Just a few months earlier, I had joined the gym with the simple goal of getting healthier, physically at least. Emotionally, I was a mess, though I never said it out loud. My marriage had become cold, like we were just roommates moving through life with the same routine but no real connection. I missed being seen, being heard, and most of all, being held. But I buried all of that behind fake smiles and early morning workouts. That's when I met Jason, my personal trainer. Jason wasn't like the other trainers. He didn't just bark reps or shout encouragements. He listened. He noticed things. The slight hesitation in my form. The dark circles under my eyes. And eventually, the way my voice cracked when I tried to laugh at something. At first, I dismissed it all. I told myself he was just doing his job. But something about the way he treated me, so respectfully, so gently, began to break through the walls I had built. We never talked about anything inappropriate. In fact, our sessions were strictly professional. But one day, after a particularly difficult workout and an even harder morning at home, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I sat down on the mat, wiped my face with my towel, and to my horror, I started crying. I didn't even realize how much pain I'd been carrying until that moment. And then Jason quietly came over, knelt beside me, and without saying a word, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. That small, thoughtful gesture felt like a dam bursting inside me. I froze. My mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. But something about the way he looked at me, not with desire, but with genuine concern, shook me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I wanted. All I knew was that I couldn't pretend anymore. That moment changed everything. What happened next took me down a path I never imagined I'd walk. A path filled with choices, secrets, and emotions I hadn't felt in years. And as much as I wanted to stay in control, life had other plans. I'll never forget what happened after that moment, because it was the beginning of something that would test every boundary I thought I'd set for myself. That day changed how I looked at everything, especially myself. I started seeing how lonely I had become, even while living under the same roof with someone I once loved deeply. My husband, Mark, wasn't a bad person. He was responsible, disciplined, always on time with bills and routines. But somewhere along the way, the warmth between us had vanished. We stopped asking about each other's day. We stopped touching. And eventually, we stopped trying. I had convinced myself that this kind of quiet emptiness was normal after years of marriage. But sitting there on that gym mat, with Jason's gentle hand on my shoulder and eyes that truly saw me, I realized how much I had been starving, for connection, for kindness, for someone just noticing that I wasn't okay. Jason didn't ask questions that day. He gave me space, stood up slowly, and quietly went to grab me a bottle of water. It wasn't about what he said. It was how safe I felt in that moment. That simple act unlocked something I didn't know I'd buried, my own voice. After that, things didn't explode between us. They didn't even move quickly. But everything shifted. I began opening up in small ways during our training sessions. I'd tell him little things about my life, how I felt stuck, how tired I was of pretending to be strong. He never pushed, but he listened. He remembered everything. And most of all, he treated me like a human being, not just a client. At home, Mark barely noticed the change in me. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. We passed each other like ghosts in the hallway. I found myself staying longer after workouts, not because I was falling for Jason, at least, that's what I told myself, but because I felt more alive in those moments than I had in years. Jason's calm energy made me feel safe, and yet, somewhere deep inside, I was starting to feel scared too. Scared of what this was turning into. Scared of the feelings I didn't want to admit I had. I told myself it was harmless. Just emotional support. Just a phase. But deep down, I knew I was lying. The hardest part wasn't what was happening between Jason and me, it was what wasn't happening in my own home. And that quiet ache started to grow, louder with each passing day. I kept telling myself I could handle it. That nothing had crossed a line. But lines, I would soon learn, are rarely drawn in black and white. The guilt started creeping in slowly. Not because I had done something terrible, but because I was beginning to feel things I shouldn't have. The more I opened up to Jason, the more I realized how emotionally distant I had become from my husband. Every time I laughed at one of Jason's jokes or felt that flutter in my chest when he remembered something small I had mentioned the week before, a part of me felt like I was slipping away from the life I was supposed to be loyal to. But then again, how long could someone stay loyal to a version of marriage that barely felt alive? At home, things were colder than ever. Mark barely looked up from his phone during dinner. Conversations were replaced with short nods or passing comments about bills or schedules. I tried to bring life back into our routine, cooked his favorite meal one night, left a note in his briefcase another, but nothing sparked even the smallest reaction. It was like trying to light a match in the rain. That silence, that emptiness, it began to feel heavier than anything else. Meanwhile, Jason had no idea how much space he was beginning to occupy in my thoughts. Our training sessions were still professional, but the energy between us had shifted. I started noticing how close he stood when he corrected my form. How our eyes met a little longer than they used to. He wasn't crossing any lines, but something unspoken hung in the air. Something we were both aware of, but too cautious to name. The real turning point came during a rainy Thursday morning session. I was emotionally drained before I even stepped into the gym. Mark and I had had another silent night, no fight, no words, just silence. I went through the motions of the workout, distracted and on the edge. At the end of the session, as I wiped sweat from my forehead, Jason hesitated before saying, "You don't have to keep everything inside all the time, you know." That one sentence broke me all over again. There was a moment, brief, quiet, where I looked at him and realized how dangerous this was becoming. I was caught between two lives. One where I kept pretending everything was fine. And the other, where someone actually saw me for who I was. But the hardest part was knowing that this story was only just beginning, and it was heading somewhere I couldn't yet predict. The days that followed felt like walking on a wire, tight, shaky, and one wrong move away from falling. I tried to distance myself from Jason, not because he did anything wrong, but because I was starting to realize how tangled my feelings had become. I told myself I needed space, but deep down, I was afraid of how easy it had become to rely on him. Every message he sent checking in after a session, every kind word, made the weight on my chest both lighter and heavier at the same time. At home, Mark began noticing the shift in my mood, but not in the way I hoped. One evening, while I was folding laundry, he looked at me for the first time in weeks and asked, "Is everything okay with us?" It caught me off guard. I stared at him, heart pounding, unsure how to answer. A part of me wanted to break down and say everything, how lonely I'd been, how much I needed more from him. But instead, I said what I always did, "I'm fine." But I wasn't. The tension between right and wrong was building fast. I was staying up late, staring at my phone, rereading old messages from Jason. Nothing inappropriate, nothing anyone could point to and say this crossed a line. But emotionally, it had gone far past that. I started dreaming of what life could look like if I had met Jason before I got married. What if things were different? What if I allowed myself to choose happiness instead of just survival? Then came the moment I couldn't ignore. One evening after a session, as I was leaving the gym, it started raining hard. Jason offered to walk me to my car with his umbrella. It was a short walk, less than 2 minutes, but something in the air between us had changed. We stood beside my car, the rain tapping gently on the metal, both of us hesitating. I looked up at him, ready to say goodbye, and in that second, the silence between us said everything. He didn't touch me. He didn't lean in. But the closeness, the tension, it was almost too much to bear. I got in the car and sat there for a long time, watching the rain blur everything around me. I knew something had shifted, and it couldn't be undone. I had reached a line, and I wasn't sure which side I wanted to stand on anymore. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, the engine off and the windows fogging up. The rain still tapped steadily above me, and my mind raced with everything I was feeling, confused, guilty, restless. That moment under the umbrella with Jason wasn't dramatic. No grand confession, no sudden touch. But it was something else, undeniable. And terrifying. It felt like a door had opened between us, quietly and completely, and now I didn't know how to close it. I thought I could just drive away and leave it all behind, bury myself in work or chores and wait for the feeling to pass. But it followed me home like a shadow. The silence at the dinner table felt heavier. Even Mark's presence started to feel unfamiliar, like he was a guest passing through instead of the man I once chose to spend forever with. I knew I had to decide something soon, but I didn't expect the decision would be forced on me. A few days later, the real twist came, and not from Jason, but from Mark. I had just returned from the gym, still wearing my jacket, when Mark walked into the living room holding my phone. His face was pale, unreadable. "Why is your trainer texting you after hours?" he asked, voice low but tight with tension. I froze. My heart stopped. I hadn't hidden anything outright, but I also hadn't been transparent. Jason's messages were supportive, nothing out of line. But they told a story that Mark had clearly read between the lines. I opened my mouth, trying to find something to say, but nothing came out. Mark wasn't shouting. He wasn't accusing. But the look in his eyes told me everything, he felt it. The distance. The emotional shift. The questions he had probably been pushing away were now right in front of him, and I didn't know how to fix it. "I didn't cheat on you," I said quietly. "But I haven't been okay." He stared at me for a long moment before walking out of the room without a word. I heard the bedroom door close, and the silence that followed was louder than any argument we could have had. The days after that were tense. Mark didn't bring it up again, but things weren't normal. He was watching me now, differently. There was suspicion in his eyes, and distance in his tone. And I was spiraling. I kept showing up at the gym, unsure whether I should talk to Jason or pull away completely. But what shocked me next was that Jason noticed the change too. One day, between sets, he looked at me and asked, "Did something happen?" And that was the moment I realized I wasn't just running from the truth, I was standing right in the middle of it, and now both men in my life knew something wasn't right. The only question was, what was I going to do about it? I didn't sleep much the night after Jason asked me if something had happened. His question wasn't pressing, just concerned, like he could feel I was pulling away. I sat on the edge of my bed long after Mark had fallen asleep, watching the soft light of the hallway stretch across the carpet. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The emotional weight was too much. I was exhausted from carrying secrets that weren't really secrets, just truths I hadn't been brave enough to speak out loud. The next morning, I asked Mark if we could talk. He looked at me carefully, like he already knew it was coming. We sat across from each other in the kitchen, the same place where we'd once shared quiet breakfasts and small moments that used to feel like home. I told him everything. Not just about Jason, but about how lost I'd been for so long. I didn't blame him, but I couldn't deny how the silence in our marriage had pushed me to find comfort elsewhere. He didn't interrupt. He didn't explode. But his silence this time wasn't distant, it was broken. So, do you love him? He finally asked. The question hit harder than I expected. I shook my head. No, I said honestly. But I think I loved how he made me feel seen. Something I haven't felt in a very long time. He looked down for a moment, then nodded. That's fair. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No doors slamming. Just two people sitting with the weight of everything that had gone unsaid for too long. Mark got up, walked to the window, and stood there for what felt like forever. Then he turned and said, I think we both stopped showing up for this marriage a long time ago. Maybe it's time we figure out who we are, separately. And just like that, it felt like something ended, but also something opened. I expected to feel relieved or maybe shattered. But what I felt most was calm. Because finally, I had told the truth. That afternoon, I went to the gym. I didn't tell Jason what happened. I didn't need to. He could see it in my eyes. As we wrapped up the session, he gave a small nod, like he understood everything without a word. But just as I was about to leave, he surprised me. I'm actually leaving, he said. Moving back to Colorado. Family stuff. I didn't know how to tell you. I froze. After all that tension, the closeness, the unspoken feelings, we would never know what could have happened. And maybe that was the twist I needed. Not everything has to lead to something more. Sometimes, people enter your life to wake you up, not to stay. As I walked out into the cool air, I didn't cry. I didn't feel regret. I felt free. Because in losing something familiar, I had finally found myself. In the weeks that followed, everything slowly settled into a quiet kind of peace. Mark and I decided not to rush anything. We lived under the same roof for a while longer, more like two people respectfully parting ways than enemies. We talked more openly than we had in years. There were no angry fights or emotional explosions, just honesty, and in a strange way, that honesty brought a sense of closure we both needed. We eventually agreed to separate, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was choosing myself without guilt. Jason left town shortly after. He texted me once from the airport, thanking me for trusting him with my story and wishing me well. There was no pressure, no promises. Just kindness. And maybe that's what I needed from him all along, not romance, but the reminder that I was still worthy of being seen and heard. His presence came during a time I was silently breaking, and even though he didn't stay, he helped put a mirror in front of me that showed a version of myself I had forgotten. As I began rebuilding, I started doing more for me. I took long walks. I enrolled in a writing class I had been putting off for years. I started reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with while trying to hold together something that wasn't holding me back anymore, but holding me down. Slowly, I realized that healing wasn't about finding someone else to fill a void, it was about finding peace in my own skin. This true infidelity story wasn't about cheating in the way people expect. It wasn't about betrayal in the physical sense. It was emotional, subtle, and deeply human. Sometimes, the deepest infidelity is when you stop being faithful to your own needs, your own happiness. I had done that for too long. Now, I was choosing differently. So yes, I cried when my fitness trainer touched me gently. Not because it was romantic or forbidden, but because in that one quiet moment, I finally felt like someone saw the pain I'd been hiding. And from there, everything began to change. If you've ever felt invisible, lost, or stuck in something that looks fine from the outside but feels empty inside, know this, you're not alone. And you have the right to choose yourself. Always. 50.